Now we're on. Great. Welcome, everyone, and what a great thing to see such a big audience for this session. I'm absolutely thrilled to have all of you here because our discussion will not be at you, but with you. What we are proposing to do here today is start a dialogue about creating a manifesto for ecosystem living. And why ecosystem living? We have urban planning, for example, that's familiar to most of you. And urban planning, of course, it's very much focused on cities and how do we manage this complexity in urban environments. But the discussion just before us was really focusing on beyond human ecosystems. And if we want to include beyond human ecosystems in our dialogue, it's really difficult to shift from this focus on urban systems to beyond human ecosystems. So we need another type of approach. And it's not really, we can't call those spatial planning either, because when we say spatial planning, where are the living beings in spatial planning? How do we consider life as an essence of these ecosystems? So we came up with this word ecosystem living as an area of investigation. And what we want to discuss today, and I'm really privileged to have amazing thinkers and creators and cultural entrepreneurs with me today who can help us think about this concept in new ways, question how our systems are currently designed, and how can we build this new agenda from the ground up. As you all know by now, if you have heard of the New European Bauhaus, the New European Bauhaus is a very, very unique initiative in this sense that it really invites communities to build the agenda from the ground up, for all of the voices from the ground where real things happen to actually filter right up to the top. And it has been really successful in doing that. So I have with me, I will just briefly introduce Jan Åman, sitting right there next to me. He is a cultural entrepreneur who has done phenomenal, he curated phenomenal exhibitions with very famous artists. Just to name, for instance, one seminal piece, he invited David Byrne of the Talking Heads to turn a whole building into a musical instrument back in, 2005 or something like that in Stockholm, and this then went to other places around the world. This will be very interesting to all of the people here who are from MTF Labs, and it's very related to this experimentation we are currently working on upstairs and in the wetlands with our MTF Labs community. We have Jan Bunge next. Jan is here both in his capacity as a veteran innovator who built a consultancy that is really using cutting-edge technologies, really frontier technologies to create enormous virtual environments. Amazing stuff. He did a speech about the work that they do, and we've recorded it, so I highly recommend you watch it if you haven't seen it. But he's also here in his capacity to represent Bjarke Ingels, who is part of our high-level roundtable, so as part of BIG, because Jan and Bjarke have been working together for very, very many years. He usually represents him at the high-level roundtable and the European Bauhaus. And then we have Markus Zappalorto, who has a real amazing track record at the junction of sciences and the arts. And we know that, for instance, Aveiro is STEAM city, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. This is very familiar to Marco. Marco has run Nesta Italia, an organization that was stimulating and funding projects at the intersection of sciences and the arts, and is now working with the TBA 21, Thyssen-Bornemisza Academy, and the Ocean Space in Venice. Markus Reimann, who was going to be sitting here, who is leading the space, his flight is delayed, so Marco is sitting there, but very, very well informed, so he'll be able to tell us. And Markus will be joining us later for a very special session, which I also highly recommend. And I'm here in my capacity as member of President von der Leyen's high-level roundtable for the new European Bauhaus. So without further ado, I think that what we are trying to do here is co-create a first version of a manifesto which we will be working on for the next 2 months, and you are all very, very welcome to contribute your thoughts to this. So we are going version control 0.1. And what we are doing, and this, I think this is really important to envisage this shift of perspective, a shift of focus. What we are doing is going from linear thinking. So this is very interesting because linear thinking is, has a huge long tradition in deductive and inductive thinking, particularly used in science and building on the shoulders of your peers, to a multidimensional approach. So a pluralistic approach. There could be many perspectives, many views, and that helps us to build knowledge. There's a new way of building knowledge by shifting perspectives. From top-down directives to an interplay between bottom-up and top-down. So we leverage all of the intelligence on the ground and we take it to high level, and at high level we can then design new instruments that can help stimulate further thinking on the ground. So there's this interplay. Small scale experiments which are incredibly valuable in these controlled environments, to mission-driven approaches. So actually lifting your gaze from the small scale to very, very high up above ground so that we can actually perceive the impact that we have on the whole ecosystem. And then the focus is shifting from the center to the periphery. Why? Aveiro is at the forefront of climate change. It's the frontier. The communities here are the ones that really need to address the big challenges. So the periphery is not the periphery anymore. The periphery has become the center. This is the focus. So this is where we want to start. So on that front, we will start with a very, very important topic, and it's been touched upon in the questions in the last panel, and that is, what does it mean to have ecosystemic democracy? So I have next to me here, I'm going to call them Jan A, Jan B. So Jan A has developed something really extraordinary in a place called Duved, in a community of 1,000 inhabitants, and they have tested new systems for democracy. So Jan, would you like to tell us a little bit about this new approach to democracy?
Absolutely. Thank you for this event, and thank you for introduction, Michela, and everything. And I think this is highly interesting in every single sense, what was spoken about here before and what we're about to say now. I had the pleasure of since now almost 5 years, spend every other week up in the north in this little village of 1,000 people, citizens, and the other time mostly in Stockholm. And instead of traveling to New York and to all these other places that I've been working in, I've been traveling by train up there. And I realized very soon that, wow, this is a key to solve things that I had been facing for like almost 20 years. Saying that when I was working, I've been working with Stockholm, I've been working with other cities in Europe and the US. And you get quite soon everybody to understand the problems, that things don't work, that the systems don't work, that the structures don't work. But by coming up to this little village, I saw something quite extraordinary, that, because I was quite reluctant to start, what should I do in a little village? But it was like, almost like a drug, because I could see that here we have a possibility to actually solve solutions. And what we did was something very simple. We just called for labs, meetings, workshops, where we asked everyone to come, all the citizens, and they came, like 20% of them. We also asked the politicians to come, because they were not driving this from the beginning, because it was through the municipally owned real estate company. So it had a mission to make housing and so on for the many, not the few. And through that, we had a possibility to be both inside and outside of the system. And we just started. We didn't ask for permission. We didn't follow the rules. And that made the inhabitants, the citizens, the villagers, they had a pretty unusual situation, because they were not invited to have opinions of what somebody had already discussed or decided, but rather we asked them, what would you like? We said, we have to develop Duved, because we're building a new school for 800 pupils, which is an enormous investment. So if we didn't attract people to come, we would lose the game completely, and it would be a failure, and it would be something terrible. So we had to make people be attracted to this, and we had to have an idea of somewhat of a growth, but also to keep the city or the village as is. And so the villagers had all kinds of fantastic ideas on how to move, where it would be best to build, how to handle infrastructure, how to make the village more secure, how to address politicians, not to say the least. So suddenly, and we also then invited for other workshops, keeping the villagers, but then making people from the monetary side come and say, would you like to invest in this? And then they saw that, well, there's a feeling here that things are actually happening. And then inviting the politicians and the civil servants, some of them angry because they said, well, this is my power. We're deciding this. And then they realized that, well, they already have people with money. They already have people with them. So we have to adopt. And then, but of course, these things take time. But we gradually could sort of invent and through a process evolve a system which was quite different, I would say, from the normal system coming from the municipality itself. Because in this case, the inhabitants, the villagers, were actually a key. They were in the front line, and they were also, because we created a sort of a development company where we have quite big money systems coming with the base in Stockholm for making these investments that were necessary. But so they were teamed up with the municipality company, but also with the villagers, and we gave the villagers the so-called golden share in the board of directors, which means that they were actually both investing in their own future, owning their own future, and deciding together with the venture capital and the politicians.
And what was the role of the civil servant in this new role of the civil servant?
I would say, like the CEO also of this company, what the civil servant becomes is a provider. It's somebody who connects and curates and make things possible. But in the world today, I mean, especially in Sweden, where we had such a strong politically driven state through the social democratic system, which was fantastic in its time. But today, it's not possible to run things in that way from the political system. So we had to create sort of what we'll talk about here, an ecosystem, or several ecosystems where people had to play and interact and interplay in between each other.
So I can tell you that, from our experience, you think, well, this can only happen in Sweden, and I can see quite a lot of brains ticking, going, it could never happen in Portugal. It just doesn't work, does it? Actually, the truth is, we have been working with the municipality of Aveiro for 3 years now, and I can tell you that without thinking that that's what they are doing, the people we work with from the municipality actually take ideas on board that we develop 1 year, and you see that they actually implement for the next year more of the stuff that was successful. So they're actually filtering from evidence that they see from our labs, from our experimentation, from the stuff that works. It actually happens organically. So even though they don't think they have that mandate, strictly speaking, they are actually curating, in a sense, with us how the things evolve. So actually it is happening. It is possible to happen. Jan B., when it comes to the role of civil servant in this and the role of democracy, what are the things we need to bridge in order for things to kind of work smoothly?
First of all, thank you very much. I really enjoy being here. We had a fabulous couple of days, and thanks to your labs. And I really think that this discussion is unbelievably timely and important, and it's about time to look at all these things properly and start changing them. So in my professional life, we deal with very similar problems at a different scale. We work a lot with very large cities and very large conglomerates, but systemically the problems are the same in every scale. And what we are struggling with the most is the fact that to start with, a city is a very complex organism, and there's many moving parts. And like with every other thing in our lives, when we are faced with a high level of complexity, we tend to put everything into boxes and we group it by topics, and then we kind of optimize within those silos. And I completely understand and believe that we need this kind of expert knowledge and research, and but at some point we realized that for us to be able to really build a sustainable presence on this planet, we need to start connecting all these different things. And I think it's fair to say that the way we educate today and the way we operate those places is just not designed in a way that we foster communication between the different departments of a university or of a city. And so we spend a lot of time trying to bridge this gap. And I think what's most needed is what you described, is this new role of a true facilitator that is actually able to bridge those gaps and to translate and to mediate between all the different parties involved, because these wicked problems, they need for all of us to come together and to co-create those solutions. And there has been attempts, like the resilience offices that were put in place by the Rockefeller Foundation, or there's a bunch of attempts that have been made on a city level in the past, but where they fail is that those new roles never got the agency, they never got the budgets to actually act, they were never given the authority and so we still have a way to go, I think, but it's this, you have to do both, right? You have to find people who are able to curate and facilitate and mediate all these discussions and create structures which allow to a high degree of freedom for people to explore those solutions, because I think we have all the pieces of the puzzle, but we haven't put it together yet.
Yeah, I mean, curating, coordinating. I mean, if you compare to the old idea of a civil servant who is given a directive to execute, so they're actually quite a passive recipient in that sense of a directive, and then what you describe is a really fantastic soft power of being able to curate, to create, to coordinate, to organize. I mean, these are very powerful positions then, aren't they? I mean, Jan, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, we have to write a book here from A to B and back again, like Andy Warhol. But anyway, no, I just wanted to emphasize that to me, what Jan said here is that this is all about this huge transformation from industrial and linear to this tech-driven connectivity, let's say, which makes everything needs to be connected instead of saying to somebody what to do. And I think that's not giving away power, but changing the role of power, which means, and that's why I think that the new European Bauhaus is such an incredibly exciting initiative, but also it gives, I think, Europe, or both Brussels and Strasbourg, a possibility to show because it has that role in a sense, to show that we are now moving from decision to connect.
Yeah.
One last thought on that.
We talk for hours when we are in a cafe. You should join us.
But there's one last thing that I forgot to mention, which is, maybe one of the most important ones, that today, and I'm generalizing to make a point, but today the main issue that we encounter when we work with municipalities is that we're often faced with the reality that there's a limited amount of money in the budget, and there's an atmosphere of competition in those organizations where suddenly the transportation department has to prove that they are more important than the housing department, more important than the energy department, because they feel like they're competing for a finite of resources, which is their budget. And the reality is that all these things are inherently interconnected, and someone's energy or someone's waste is someone's energy, which has to do with mobility and housing. And I mean, logically, all things have to be considered as one organism, understood as one organism. And so, the really key to success here, I think, is for us to align incentives and create a setting where we all start to work towards the same goal, and that has a very important part of that is the monetary dimension of budgeting.
Yeah, I've actually put ecosystemic convergence up on the screen now, because what we are talking about is convergence, right? And the convergence in the sense that we're talking about radical inclusion. So when we talk convergence, it's not about, here's all the set of boxes that we have to tick, and then we tick one at a time. Because the moment that you create boxes means that you're excluding some, and we all know how that feels, because every single person here has filled a form online for the government or something and felt that some of those boxes don't belong to them. Now, convergence, real radical inclusion means that we ask, where do we converge, rather than thinking of categories. And that means that we are far more mission-oriented, and that means that we can join our knowledge together as well. So Marco, you are someone who has been really joining disciplines together in your career, and of course now also with the TBA 21, and also with the projects that you're on the new European Bauhaus, which is the wonderful Bauhaus of the Seas. So what is your view on this? How do we need to converge? What is needed here in order to for a proper ecosystemic effect to happen?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me today, and I would like to thank my fellow panelists as well, because we've been speaking since yesterday. Basically, we didn't sleep last night almost to continue this conversation, to work on this manifesto. And actually, you're right about convergence being a big part of my career. I started working in innovation and social innovation, and then I'm now working for the TBA 21 foundation, the Thyssen-Bornemisza Contemporary Art Foundation, that was created 20 years ago by Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza, fourth generation of art collectors, who decided to use art as a way of having societal impact and environmental action. So that was her vision 21 years ago, and we're really happy that, about 15, 20 years later, the European Commission is now making this part of the core focus, this multidisciplinary approach, bringing together disciplines that we've considered separate boxes for many years, bringing them together. Because we realize that by bringing together the creative world, the art world, with the scientific and technology world, we can create products, technologies that are more accessible, more inclusive, and more sustainable. And for TBA 21, convergence is really about using art for increased accessibility and inclusivity, and to share more information about what's around us, and to bring different people together to work together on the development of solutions for action. And in particular, in the last 11 years, we've been focusing on oceans. So we've created actually a new team, the TBA 21 Academy, which is the experimental arm of the foundation, focusing on the oceans. And we've been focusing on the oceans for many different reasons. Just to mention some of them, first of all, we all know that oceans are key for having an impact on climate change. We only know 10% or less about the oceans, and still they're 70% of the world, and we don't know enough about the oceans. The oceans, are part of our cultural heritage, and we know that by the sea level rising, they can destroy part of our cultural heritage. Cities like Venice, just to mention one because we are now in Venice, can be completely destroyed and disappear because of climate change.
Marco, Aveiro was erased twice by the ocean in its history. It had to be completely rebuilt. So we are in the Venice of Portugal here.
Exactly. And I was getting to Venice and the connection with Aveiro in a second, and also we know that there is a huge economy around the seas, and we know again we using arts and culture, and we're bringing together scientists and artists to develop new knowledge about the ocean. One thing we realized when we got to Venice, so we arrived in Venice about 5 years ago. We made an agreement with the city of Venice, so going back to policymakers. The city, we identified an empty space, an old church, the San Lorenzo church, that is it's 1,000 years old. And it's where Marco Polo and his family are buried. And this church was completely abandoned, closed for 100 years. And the city of Venice was looking for a foundation to take care of this church, and we take up the challenge, and we decided to have our own planetary center for multidisciplinary research in Venice, and we created the Ocean Space. And Ocean Space is really a center where we bring together arts and science, and where every year we do exhibitions, and these exhibitions are the result of 2 to 3 years research made by artists together with scientists in the sea, by the sea, about the sea. And actually one of the artists that we're showing this year is a Portuguese artist, Diana Policarpo. And Diana Policarpo from Lisbon, she spent 3 weeks in the Sauvage Islands, that are deserted islands between Madeira and the Canary Islands. And she went there because in these islands there is a virus called ciguatera, and ciguatera is a virus that is mainly in equatorial seas, and now because of climate change is actually expanding to northern latitudes. And she went there because she wanted to know more about this virus, and she had to teach herself how to implement certain processes in order to study the sea. But I was going to say something else, that ocean literacy is so important that when we got to Venice and we opened Ocean Space, we realized that there weren't sign languages about the oceans. So together with artists and deaf communities, we created new sign languages because we realized that a big chunk of population was excluded by a massive problem or opportunity, which is knowledge about the seas. And this is like something that we got there because of convergence, because of inclusion, and because of the willingness to bring together different disciplines and different communities around a specific focus or a specific mission. And just to finish up, we've just been awarded the Bauhaus of the Sea project, and the Bauhaus of the Sea project is part of the new European Bauhaus.
Lighthouse.
Yeah, and brings together 11 very different partners, 18 very different partners from all over Europe to really create, co-create multidisciplinary pilots and then solutions to protect and engage coastal communities for climate change, for sustainability. And we can talk about it a bit later, because now I think I spoke too much.
No. This was, I think, hugely interesting and very, very valuable, especially for the Aveiro community and also for the MTF Labs community, who are quite a lot of them I see here in the audience, who are currently working on the topic of ecosystem living within the Ria de Aveiro, which is one of the most biodiverse areas of wetland in Europe, and therefore very relevant. But also, I did, while you were talking, put ecosystemic knowledge up, because what you are talking about is not just convergence, but a new way to generate new knowledge. Yeah. The artist, a rigorous artist, like you say, will spend weeks and months and years rigorously questioning and illuminating the subject matter from different perspectives, unravels new knowledge in all of these new unique ways. And this is phenomenally useful to scientists. So for instance, in our labs, we have a professor of oceanography from Aveiro, and we also have a veteran of oceanography who spent most of his life working with the British Oceanographic Institute and has revealed new ways of measuring glacial melting through the speed of sound and things like that. Peter Keeney might even be here. Anyway, we have amazing, amazing experts in the room who are working together with artists on these topics. So what happens with the knowledge that we create? Jan, do you want to go in on the subject of knowledge? Jan B, sorry.
I keep it short. I'm particularly interested in one area that I think we completely neglected for way too long, and this is the collective knowledge that often is a tacit knowledge that we all carry in us. And what I mean by this is that, I'm a trained landscape architect. I work a lot with designers and architects, and everybody would say that, in the end, we're designing for people. And then I think, the success of any built project, any building, any city, any square, any park, really gets defined the moment people experience it. The moment I step into a building for the very first time, I instantly feel the quality of that space, because I'm a spatial sensor. Like, we are all amazing spatial sensors. And not only do I experience it, I also form my opinion of that space. So we all carry in us a deep knowledge of what we like and what we dislike, and where we feel well and where we don't feel well. And if you go around and ask people in cities, it feels like everybody feels like no agency and disenfranchised almost from something that's so fundamentally important to our health, to our well-being, to everything we do. Our environment has such a massive impact on us, but at the same time, we never manage to find a voice or to articulate that. And so my question really is there a way to find a new language, which I struggle to define, but for me it's like an emotional language where we share our emotions by, maybe through images or through, designing shared environments, I mean, it doesn't make
You've
much sense.
designed virtual environments where this is actually possible. I mean, the level of this virtual environments is not just stuff that you've seen. You should see what these guys are doing. They're on a different planet.
But to make it accessible, right? The whole point is that, non-technical, today when we do a public participation process, we present technical drawings and images and films to non-technical people, and we ask them their opinion. This is completely wrong because, even professionals often struggle to imagine how this space will feel once it's built. Even if you have the greatest renderings and the greatest films, that's just not possible. But today, I can create a simulation of that space, a digital simulation where I can stand at the corner and I can feel the difference between a light finish or a dark finish. I can feel the difference between this being a 3-story building or a 10-story building, and I can feel the impact, the simulated impact. And I think that's what we all deserve to make better informed decisions. And at the same time, I think there's a massive potential to tap into this tacit knowledge that we all carry in us.
And Jan A., what do you think is driving communities towards these objectives?
I think not only communities, but also the whole knowledge system is as everything right now, in a sort of convergence where everything is changing rapidly. And I mean, working with Duved, we've created something that we call campus without university.
Transgenerational?
Transgenerational, and also combining taking the rural possibilities of lower costs, the possibility of prototyping, the possibility of actually testing things in a new way, of having different teams to work with. So when I work with an architect, I don't give the architect the only, that's why the previous panel was very interesting. It's not given just to the architect, but to the architect to form a team of experts to do something that could be relevant for the future of production, for the future of whatever. And that actually attracted universities to come. I didn't ask for them. But suddenly we had the Umeå University, we had the Mitt University, we had the Trondheim University, we have even now the School of Economics in Stockholm and so on, are interested to come to have studios there. Even my friend Farshid Musavi at Harvard is interested in this. Because it's a way of actually connecting learning, scientific learning in a very complex world with prototyping and testing. And I think that's really the future. And there are possibilities in the village, in the rural village, because of less administration, because of the process we had. And I think that you can never have to start with in a city, but it's very easy to then scale and test also in the city. And just one more thing, because I think, as you mentioned, for instance, the David Byrne exhibition, and all these exhibitions that I've been doing throughout the years, and there are very many, and usually with artists who have become quite known afterwards. And it's just by a very simple thing. Ask them, why are you going to do another exhibition? And how could you do it? Based on what you've done before. So the David Byrne thing was really to say that, I admire you as a musician. So don't do an art exhibition, because that would be boring. Introduce the music into the idea of the exhibition space. And it turned out to be something that was completely overwhelming for most people. And I think that's really the thing also for like knowledge systems in real life, in cities, in society, and in rural villages. And that's also producing a new kind of knowledge system.
And most of the time we said it's driven by missions. I'm going to go to productivity, because you mentioned prototyping and you mentioned making. And in our labs, people are now, they've gone from global brainstorming with satellites from other parts of the planet to getting inspired by each other, to understanding each other's knowledge, understanding what each person in the room can do, every single person on equal playing field, and then going into this huge injection, we call it like acupuncture points in personal development, because it goes into this huge productivity. Over 2-3 days, they construct several projects. I mean, several, like last year it was 13, And one of the 13 was a 6-part symphony that involved 40 people. So high-level productivity that's driven by these new systems that we're discussing. It's really phenomenal. It's completely different to what we had before. Prototyping. Is this how you see it, creating prototyping? To me, what that does is creates the sort of evidence for policymakers that's not based on statistics anymore. It's about tangible results on the ground, right?
I can just say one thing and then we'll pop by, but because I mean, since we're doing things now for real, we're actually going to build now 5 houses, we're going to build then 30,000 square meters further and so on. And my role in this is to say, can we do it in a new way, in a way that's smarter, that's going to last, and that will develop into something that's better. And then realizing that the systems we have of producing, say, buildings, they're really stupid. They're outdated. And we asked one guy who's very conscious to sustainability, but was former CEO of one of these big, I won't say which one, production companies, and well-known and internationally known. And the costs were very high. And then I asked a local guy who's not even professional in that, he's a professor at the university, but working with innovation and sustainability. And we lowered the cost by more than half, just by working with locals, with smaller entities, and smaller players. And that's, I mean, saving like 500,000, 600,000 euros per house, and they're only 200 square meters. But then the other problem is that, and which is much bigger, that's to find the way how to, because we cannot have a world only built on small scale. So the big problem, and I think something that we've discussed at length here, is really how to find the new way, which there's several solutions, of course, of how to build in a different way. And I mean, I'm working with Shigeru Ban, who's also one of the European Bauhaus architects, and I mean, the way he managed to produce a system of production that the citizens themselves can raise, but you can also make a system where we could actually make his greenhouse all over Europe. And I think we should.
And I think this was shown extremely well in the early days of the Ukrainian war, when 2 million Ukrainians were crossing the border into Poland. Exactly. And Shigeru Ban, architect Shigeru Ban, got together, so he's on a high-level roundtable, got together with Hubert Tramer, whom you haven't heard about, but he's a phenomenal a Polish representative, architect and representative of a high-level roundtable, who they got together with hundreds of architecture volunteers to build privacy shelters for all of the refugees who were being housed in large gyms and open plan spaces, so that families would have privacy. This happened within 2 weeks. People were mobilized, people built, people were on the ground doing this in very, very sustainable ways. So, sorry, Jan B, you were gonna jump in on this.
Yeah. So just to zoom out one second and to put it into perspective. If you, there's a funny graph. If you look at any industry on our planet, anything we build, and you look at how we have managed to optimize the industrial production over time. Everybody knows that the strongest example is the car industry, where we have managed to build very optimized systems built on a platform logic, which but mash them all together, and you'll see that in general we manage to become more productive and more efficient, more resource efficient over time. The only exception to that is the construction industry. The construction industry has managed in the last 50 years to get a bit worse. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's and here I say it. It's the most corrupt and backwards thinking industry that is basically only focused on. So what they did is they spent the last decades to manage the risk out of the investment, which from an investment perspective is what you do, right? But what this leaves you with is that you only have one way of doing things, which is the way you always have done it. Because that is where you have 10 years of data. This is what you spend all this time optimizing your safeguarding your investment. So it's a risk management problem. But anyway, my point is that luckily we don't need the construction industry. Luckily, we can go directly and take the learnings from other industries in industrial manufacturing, may it be the car industry or other fields, and the robotic automation, throw in a bit of machine learning, and suddenly we can see a future where we're going to switch to a componentized, fully modular offsite construction, which we will arrive at just because it is cheaper. And there's a nice side effect, which is that it's also much more environmentally friendly. Because the worst thing that we can do is in situ construction the way we do it today on our planet. So, but what's driving it is an economic logic, because that's what drives everything. And I very strongly argue that with all my architect and designer friends, that we have to step up and we have to own the Excel sheet. You cannot ignore the reality of your clients' needs, of our city's needs. We really have to come up with better models to manage risk on those projects, but also to create economic benefits. But the crazy thing is that once we have moved, or as we are moving to this componentized modular offsite construction, which is fully automated, everything will change. The way we design, procure, obviously build, and operate will change. And we're going to see very new models emerging. Yesterday we talked about ideas where, maybe we are not going to, buy all these things. Maybe these are all things that we are somewhat leasing there in somewhat circular systems. I mean, there's now companies that you can lease a wall of a building, and then suddenly the incentive is to create the most durable wall that will last the longest, because you actually are just renting it from me and I take it back, and with a bit of work I can rent it to the next one. And so suddenly we are encouraging really a long-term thinking, which is the fundamental shift that we have to go through. We have to. Saskia Sassen, I met her only twice in my life, but twice she said the same thing, which really stuck with me. She said, Jan, we have to stop treating everything like a mining company would, extract the wealth as quickly as we can, and then we don't care about the hole we are leaving behind, right? And then the second thing she said was, don't forget, banks and capital, not long ago, 50 years ago, they were family businesses, and they had the interest to create intergenerational wealth. And this is the key here. We have to go back to creating intergenerational wealth. Everything changes the moment that you are listed on the stock market and you have quarterly reports and shareholder value to report to, right? And so all we have to do is remember how it was 50 years ago when we invested, or 100 years ago when we invested in the railway, because we knew we're going to make money in the long term, a lot of money, but not in the short term, not for the quarterly results.
So I just want to do one more, because I know that we're running out of time. We started a bit late, so I'm allowing a little bit more. But I also want to ask one question to Marco, and then if we do have time, maybe we can take a question from the audience. The economic incentives, for example, for the construction industry, who currently 98% of packaging of construction materials, which is plastic, mostly, is not being recycled. Do you know how many tons of plastic that is? Most contain polychlorinated biphenyls, which end up in the oceans and they kill marine life. That's a fact. Marco, the sort of work you do at TBA 21, but also Bauhaus of the Seas. These are the sort of really serious issues that you have to address from the point of view of the seas and the oceans.
Yes, this is this is one of the many
yeah.
one of the many problems affecting the seas. I mean, this is huge, and definitely the Bauhaus of the Sea will tackle this problem. But this is one of the problems that is probably the most visible one. We know that there are, plastic islands in the oceans. We all been in beautiful beaches full of plastic, and this is visible, and this is really changing ecosystems and killing fish. But also the temperature of the sea is massively increasing, and that's something that has a massive impact on ecosystems, on corals, on fish, and on food. And this is also another massive issue that needs to be tackled.
So are you looking at that in Bauhaus of the Seas now? You're starting this huge lighthouse, many partners, lots of people on board.
This is one thing I want to mention is that we're looking at these problems. We're looking at taking a collaborative approach in solving these problems. One of the aims of the Bauhaus of the Sea, which was jointly agreed by all the consortium members, was that we're not going to take top-down decisions. We're not going to start processes of developing top-down experiments, but the city, the citizens must be involved in this process because they have the knowledge. And this is one thing we realized when we arrived in Venice, is that that knowledge of the lagoon was slowly going to be wasted, because people in Venice, they're not passing this knowledge through intergenerational exchanges, and this is why we started a massive educational program with kids, and the food program, rediscovering the food, the indigenous and species from the lagoon, and working with chefs to cook this food, and working with kids to study the lagoon. And we're also doing a program of walks in the lagoon with Venetians, because to tackle these problems that we've been mentioning, you need to have that knowledge.
Absolutely, this is fantastic, and also I think very inspiring, both for the labs, so people from the labs here, but also for the people of Aveiro, in the sense that what could we do here in Aveiro? It's so similar to Venice, and also what's been done in Duved was also food systems, it was also education, it was all of these very, very essential things for a habitat. Is there a question we can take from the audience?
I just want to add one little thing, and it's because we'll
be here until tomorrow.
No, because we were invited actually, and you, Michela, was advising that project to test the ideas of Duved on the city of Umeå up north, and what I discovered there was
similar size to Aveiro.
Yeah, but because what we discovered was that we could, through rethinking how are decisions made, how are we addressing the citizens of Umeå, and we could form neighborhoods with a stronger incentive to actually come up with ideas for how the city would be driven forward. We found that the two main roads of the city we were able to transform them, because they built a circular street road around
periphery,
the city.
so those two main roads were now part of the city center.
Yeah, and suddenly we had land, property, possibilities to try a different kind of a city for today, where we could rethink mobility, we could rethink producing food, we could rethink housing, and we could sort of integrate all those things. And I think that's really what we're talking about, because then you can try a new kind of production system, what my Miss Jan B here is talking about so incredibly wisely, and what the learnings from Venice and so on. And I think we need to try, because cities were built, most cities are built on a very industrial era. And we're in a new time. We can do whatever, and it's fun.
Yeah. On that note, does anybody have a quick question? Because I don't want to take away from the panel, a really great panel that's coming up, which is also incredibly important. So,
yes. Hello. Thank you very much.
Please introduce yourself and then...
Sure. My name is JP, UX researcher at Microsoft. So yesterday, as part of the MTF Labs, we had this incredible presentation by Professor Jammer Hunt.
From Parsons.
And one of the topics that he brought up was how, when you look at the problem at a different scale, it just becomes essentially a different problem. And I would like to know the thoughts of some of you about what can we do to deal with growth. We are constantly growing as a species, and I suspect that one of the reasons why we are now questioning so many things is because we are growing as a species, and we are kind of having an increasingly strong impact, and it's very difficult to deal with this if this growth is not, I don't know, controlled or dealt with. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
No, it is. I mean, it is the $1 million question. I mean, how? So, my hope is that if we manage to, at the end, we are all humans, and in the end, it's all about communication and it's all about empathy, in my belief. You know, we have to figure out ways where we can understand each other beyond, you know, graphs and words, and you know, so somewhat, you know, building on experiments like you know, Jan's experiment in Sweden. I think my hope is that we can create structures which allow a high degree of freedom, because the reality is that we will have to negotiate all of those solutions as we scale them in multiple ways with multiple actors, and there's not one fits all kind of solution, right? But there's a bunch of things that, you know, we will have to adopt, and the key thing that stands out for me is we have to learn to listen and to feel, you know, what it is, and to equally respect, you know, all the dimensions, you know, because we're so trained to, you know, have this myopic view on, you know, and so yeah, it's not really an answer to your question.
No, but this connects very, very well to another absolutely amazing member of the high-level roundtable, Sheila Patel, who talks about actually assuming a more informal attitude, because we are all very formal, particularly in academia. We're very, very formalized. And so as soon as you create boundaries within this formality, you are excluding others from this. And what she talks about is we have millions of slum dwellers in informal settlements in the world. And they often get bulldozed because governments are embarrassed. These are incredibly important for global sustainability, to actually for us to consider informal settlements, informal arrangements, to leave the formal a little bit, loosen up a little bit, start to listen, engage.
Just a quick remark, because I also thought that this talk by Jamie Hunt was absolutely mind-blowing, in the sense that, and I think what he's actually creating is kind of your language system in Venice for the ocean, but for actually how we can look at the world in a different way, because we have now the technology to compare, to look at in different scales at the same time, to see what, if I do this, what will happen over here. And that's my I mean, having now worked day and night for 5 years with what we're doing in Duved, having worked day and night here discussing all this. We have the solutions. They're out there. We have it all set. It's just that we need to have groups like this. And of course, like Duved is a tiny little village, but come up, come and help us.
So it's a very good note to wrap up this session, and I really genuinely invite you all to actually contribute to this, to building of this manifesto. We will
absolutely
post some links, and we will ask people to contribute and say, okay, what do you think should be the manifesto for ecosystem living? And then hopefully in about a couple of months' time, we can discuss it again and actually see where we got to. But certainly solutions are there. We know we can look at ourselves in different ways, and we can actually start to map out new systems according to the real values that we want to project, and not just those that we have inherited. So on that note, a round of applause for our speakers.
Vamos agora dar início ao terceiro painel dedicado ao EIT Culture and Creativity, chamando ao palco o moderador